what you're going to see are areas of stability. You're going to see some countries that are going to negotiate what I would call a standing truce on tariffs, right? I think the markets will believe the deals that we strike.
Yeah, okay.
The deals that we get done. When Donald Trump does a deal, he wants it to be the last and final deal.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Brandon Daniels. Brandon is the CEO of Exiger, which provides AI-powered supply chain and third-party risk management solutions to Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. Exiger has annual revenues of over $150 million and was acquired by Carlyle and Inside Partners for $1.2 billion in 2023. Brandon, welcome to World of DaaS.
Hey, it's good to see you, Oren. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited. Now, let's start with the topic du jour. What do tariffs mean for supply chain risk management?
Yeah, I mean, for supply chains right now, tariffs mean chaos.
Yeah.
It's tough because no one knows what tariffs will actually embed themselves into the market right now. It's been a tariff roller coaster. So, at the moment, it looks like there's going to be a broad, lower but broad reciprocal tariff. But at the same time, I know that the administration is right now working deals with Mexico and Canada and even Vietnam to bring down the potential reciprocal tariffs. And we don't know what that's going to mean for the market. For our customers, it means a lot of uncertainty. And you know that corporations and the markets, they hate uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so it means a good deal of conservatism around spend decisions, around investments, around supply chain optimization opportunities. For us as a technology, it means an absolute boom, though, because our customers are recognizing that multi-tier visibility is a necessity in today's very volatile market, in today's very volatile world, as our Earth and our climate has changed, and it is requiring our customers to understand how products that they make can go through 30 transoceanic hops before they land on a store shelf, right?
Yeah.
And how each of those can be subject to a disruption or a tariff or whatever it might be.
And I don't think anyone can predict the future, but we probably can predict that it will be increasingly unpredictable, right? Like my guess is that these tariff rates are going to keep changing. There's not going to be stability, at least in the next 12 months. Or do you disagree?
No, I totally agree. I think that what you're going to see are areas of stability. You're going to see some countries that are going to negotiate what I would call a standing truce on tariffs, right?
But even then, like, how much do you think the market will believe it and then therefore invest behind it? Or are they going to just presume it's going to be higher and invest behind a worse case scenario or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the markets will believe the deals that we strike.
Yeah, okay.
The deals that we get done. When Donald Trump does a deal, he wants it to be the last and final deal. It wants it to be the deal to end all deals. It's in his vernacular, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But I think that everything that stands in ambiguity, the market will disbelieve, right? Anything that is subject to a broad-based or just sort of standard reciprocal tariff, people will think is going to be subject to and have to adapt to change. But the core concern is how many iterative changes will you make to the benefit of United States or European or Asian corporations on a continuous basis. Like, I imagine that our tariff changes or our tariff rates might actually iteratively change on very nuanced topics. Like, if you look at what China did to the microelectronics tariffs that they applied, or in as response retaliation for the US tariffs on Chinese goods, what they did is they actually said, okay, it's not a tariff on where you're buying the goods from. The stuff could come from the United States. The tariffs are actually going to be on where the manufacturing of the wafer happened, right? And that's such a nuanced and precision sort of surgical attack on US wafer or US fab capabilities,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That it's going to be hard to
Because
keep.
they want to go, because which makes sense. Like if you're trying to direct the tariff specifically at a country or specifically, you want to do it at the component level, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's going to lead to a lot of very detailed regulatory tracking, which
Yeah.
I don't think people are prepared for.
And what are some of like the? I assume we're going to see tons and tons of changes in supply chain. Some of them are pretty obvious, but what are some of the non-obvious ones you think we should expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the non-obvious ones are that different markets have different levels of um, they have different levels of tolerance for different levels of cost change. You know, if you wind back to 2008, you may remember, Oren, there was a brief period where gas prices spiked like crazy, right? 2007 to 2008, price
Yep.
uh, oil prices had spiked by like 3, 4x. Um, there was literally reshoring of entire supply chain lines, like IKEA's major furniture building for the United States shifted to Danville, Virginia, for almost a decade because of those price spikes and those intermediary logistics. And so the things that I think are going to be really interesting over the next, let's say, 5 years is going to be the types of manufacturing that's going to come back to the United States because of the imposition of tariffs, and whether or not whether or not those industries are going to be sustainable, or whether or not those industries are going to be long term in the United States, because the ability to reset a supply chain line on some commodity goods has become unbelievably fast,
Yep.
because now you can build a plant or you can build a manufacturing site in years, right? Or maybe even under a year. You can
Not in the U.S. though, but you can do that in other
in
places
other
potentially.
places, that's
Yep.
right. And in the US, I mean, there are some places in North Texas that are basically deregulated.
Yeah.
There's capacity to build. There's
And you think
exist.
you could create a factory in 1 or 2 years there?
You could because
Okay, because so
as
that would
long as you
be
have.
so that does change things if it doesn't take like 3 or 4 years to get
That's
something
right.
live. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right. So you have zones that are special economic zones where you could build quickly. You could drop in automation, and you could essentially offset the labor arbitrage advantage that a lot of emerging
And why
markets.
doesn't like if it like it, in some ways one of the benefits that China has, like in Shenzhen or some of these other places, it says like everyone manufactures right there. So just like to moving the goods between these places, it's like the factory next door is the one that's making it, right? And
Yeah,
then sometimes you'll even have people who move between those companies pretty, because they're aggressively hiring from one another and they're taking like the best practices there. Could you imagine like a special economic zone in the US to rival where they would all kind of, and then it would have some sort of access to a port and some sort of access to train networks and other types of things?
absolutely. They replicated that model in Mexico, Oren, as you know, right?
Yeah.
So I would imagine that the United States will build those similar economic zones, and I think those will be actually high paying, pretty advanced engineering
Oh yeah.
jobs too, because again, in order to compete with China or Vietnam or any of these other countries. You can't be manufacturing with manufacturing workers in the way that we used to, right? It's going to be non-traditional manufacturing processes.
Interesting. And then and what do you think, like ultimately, like who are going to be the winners um of these like new tariff and trade policies?
Yeah, the winners are undetermined, because what you need in order for US manufacturers to be the winners, you need us to nuance really quickly the tariffs so that you have component level or material level items, right? That are today subject to the broad-based tariffs.
Yep.
You need those component or material level items to be excluded from the tariffs so that you can get the manufacturing of end use goods, keep the tariffs on end use goods, get the manufacturing of end use goods back into the States. And then you can essentially maintain commodity supply chains into emerging markets in the way that they are today, because it's really hard to build those, heavy rare earth element processing capabilities inside the United States
And
within a
why is it so like? I mean, why is it so hard to like refine lithium in the United States? Like, well, is it just because it's super dirty, or like what? Like, why can't we do that here?
Yeah, I
We
mean,
refine oil, like
so there are three reasons. One, regulation. Two, it's doing it up to standards that the United States can that the United States can accept. And then three, it is the mining and then the processing capabilities being built. I mean, it's a challenge from a overall infrastructure perspective to support some of these large scale industrial practices. So, if we could make it so that you could actually produce a processing center in the United States for lithium, and you could get through approvals and you could get through regulatory paperwork in under 3 years or even under 5 years, then you could expedite the next piece. But then after that, getting to the high tech ways in which you can clean these facilities, you can clean the air, you can make it so that it's safe for employees. That's the next leg. And then the third place is when you've imposed all those regulations, when you've got all those advanced capabilities, making sure your cost comparative, right? Making sure you have cost symmetry, especially after some form of economic incentives, maybe tax-based or tariffs, creating blockades or exclusions for
because
other cheaper
shipping that
markets.
stuff isn't super cheap or easy either. So if someone was making something with it nearby, there's you have some sort of like built-in advantage. Like right now, the problem is like, yeah, they're creating the rare earths in China, but also they're like using them in China
Yes,
in the process as well, right?
that's right.
So if they
That's
had to
right.
use them in Mexico or something, like it would be harder for those guys to make money too.
You're bringing up a great point, which is in the 80s, certain countries deverticalized, certain companies deverticalized. We had hyper specialization.
Yep.
And then we also had globalization. The only place where that didn't happen was in communist countries.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video.
And why didn't that happen in communist countries? Because they own all of the industries.
Yeah, they didn't have a choice. They had to. Yeah, yeah,
So they perfectly verticalize.
yeah.
Right? You're essentially all rolling back up to the Chinese government. So you're not a globalized business. You're a completely verticalized, closed supply chain. But what that also does is it makes it very hard to innovate. And that's where the United States, Europe, lots of places around the globe still have a competitive advantage. Is you can get specialization that drives the profit motive to innovate. And that's why I think the West still wins in the end.
Are there countries you think are like the most likely losers, or
Yeah,
industries that are most likely losers?
yeah. I mean, I think some of uh, the countries that are reliant on um, the infrastructure investment from China that we've seen over the last 20 years are losers, like Zambia, right? Zambia is supposed to become the third largest copper producer in the world over the next decade. And that has largely been due
So it's like
to
so I assume Chile is like one of the top copper. Who are the top copper producers?
yeah, it's Chile, it's Peru,
Okay.
it's largely South American based. But those mines are starting to reduce in quality of ore, so it's harder to mine. Kind of like
Mhm.
the issue that you have with shale
Yep.
oil in Canada. So you're seeing reduction of quality of ore, and you're seeing these very rich untapped mines in places like Zambia. China has invested over $5 billion into the infrastructure in Zambia. But like what just happened is because they don't have the regulatory oversight and because they cut costs on the mining infrastructure, you have these like major security issues, these major environmental problems, these major like hazardous risk issues. So what just happened in Zambia is they misbuilt the dam. They didn't invest enough into the dam build that they had to do in order to start one of the major mines. The dam split, opened up, and leaked a bunch of
Oh my
mining
gosh. Wow.
chemicals into the water. They spoiled over 200 miles of river. Now Zambia has to clean it up, Warren. Now, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to actually have to borrow money from China to do it.
Yeah.
They're going to end up in debt bondage. And so these
A
countries,
lot of these countries are essentially, becoming uh, 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 essentially captive to China because of that debt, right?
that's right. Well, they're captive to China because of the debt. They're captive to China because China then owns the market for buying those goods. And if the United States starts sourcing themselves, then those, basically vassal states of China from an economic perspective are left in a lurch. They're left in a place where, they're not able to negotiate and to deal independently with the United States. Those are the real losers. I think like Brazil and Zambia and a lot of
Yeah.
these countries are subject to some hard times ahead.
What about like countries like Germany? And I've heard all these different prognostications about them. Like, where do you fall on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Europe um, is actually going to be able to navigate the next 20 years. I mean, I don't know after that. And
Yeah,
I don't even know, the Monte Carlo scenario on that would go wild into completely unpredictable. But I think Europe is going to be able to navigate this, maybe not as a unified EU, especially with the sort of differing opinions on the defense investment that they have to make in order
Yep.
to maintain their own security. But I do think countries like Germany, I think countries like Italy, I think countries like the UK, obviously not in the EU zone, but still in that European corridor, still have really important global relationships and really important global supply lines that will keep them in a commanding position.
Yeah, but even like 'cause in part of like in Germany, like just the car industry is so dominant there. Um, if you have electric cars, you have fewer suppliers, so you have all these kind of problems there. Of course, seems like the best electric cars aren't being built in Germany, whereas in the past the best cars were being built in Germany. Maybe they'll catch up because obviously they have good engineers there, but that does seem like it could have like a huge effect overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think even some of the rebalancing with the United States in terms of car manufacturing could lead to a reduction in EU capacity to sell individually. I mean, we talk about what are these tariffs trying to achieve? I mean, American car manufacturers want to sell into Europe, and they sell next to nothing into Europe in
Yeah,
comparison to the
yeah.
3.5 million vehicles that are being purchased there, right? Like it's a really asymmetric trading pattern.
We got
So
to get some bigger roads for our F-150s, though. There,
that's
right? It's
right.
hard.
That's
It's hard to navigate those in Amsterdam.
right.
Now there are a lot of areas where like the trade restrictions are just like super leaky. We've seen that with like Russian oil. We've seen that with like Chinese goods, which are essentially just kind of quote unquote packaged in Vietnam. Like, how does one fight these leaks better?
I think it's difficult to fight the leaks. And I think it's difficult to fight the leaks because companies don't want to know, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's
The
a
end buyer doesn't want to know. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Why
right.
would they? Yeah. In fact,
Right.
it's in there. It's really it's not it's in their best interest to not know.
Exactly. And so, global regulation plus the actual governments investing in their own degree of transparency is the only road that I can see to closing some of these gaps. Because what happened after 9/11 was the United States started using all of its dollar processing capabilities to start identifying where people were missing, terrorism related trades, terrorism related transactions, where they were missing, sanctions transactions. Like if you Google Exiger and Huawei, you'll see that it was reported that Exiger found the Huawei rerouting of equipment from the U.S. into Iran. It was reported by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and a bunch of other companies or a bunch of other publishers. The fact is that the kind of oversight necessary to drive industry action, it has to be invested in at the top level in those global policing organizations.
Yep.
And then that flows through to the corporations, just like it did the banks. I mean, the banks scaled up their ability to manage money laundering and financial crime and sanctions issues, like to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars between 2001 and 2025. In order for you to see that same kind of modernized change of identifying sanctions and export control issues, identifying IP leakage or IP theft, or identifying the utilization of forced labor for the purposes of economic coercion, you're going to need a lot of enforcement. And I think the UFLPA enforcement that you've seen with seizures at the border, that's a first step. But criminal enforcement for not having the appropriate level of programs, that's when you're going to start to see some of these.
It's one thing to figure out things that are coming in, which is hard enough. And it's just obviously, I mean, you can see that with illegal drugs and everything. It's just so hard to figure out. Another thing with like figuring out like things going out, like that just seems super hard to figure out how that goes. And of course, like, it can go out, you're allowed to send it to this place, but then, it ends up going to place C or something. It just becomes very, very hard to know like where that will end up.
Yeah, it's really tracking the money. And, our customers have used our technology to do that on the federal government side. As you mentioned, we have 65 federal agencies that use our technology. We're the most widely adopted supply chain risk technology in government agencies. But at the same time, what they have to do is they have to use that visibility to then support policy. And policy then takes a while to get into actual enforcement actions. Like we just released 2 reports, Oren, one on our reliance on Chinese-made pharmaceuticals, specifically like antibiotic APIs and things like that, that are widely necessary in order for us to support cost-effective medicine. We just released another report on our ability through our threat actor intelligence to identify all of the original funding sources for DeepSeek. And we were able to show that through grants and through research studies that were funded by the PLA, that China had actually poured, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars into DeepSeek, both investment and research, and what we believe is intellectual property theft from US universities that were involved in generative AI collaboration. The fact is, in order to now take that information and do something with it, there are a bunch of policy and regulatory steps that could take weeks, months, years to actually put into action the things that they're learning from these reports.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like you see all these stats, like with like, the Russian sanctions, like France's exports to Russia went down by X, and then France's exports to Armenia and Kazakhstan went up by exactly X during the, and so it was like, okay, like you just like doesn't take like a genius to figure out like these things are being routed. Now, yeah, but it still hurt the Russians because now they got to pay a VIG.
Yes.
So they're paying 20% more than they were paying before than they were doing. So maybe it does still have like a quote unquote cost to the Russians, and maybe that's reasonable since it wouldn't have any cost really to the French economy. Yeah. But at least you got to be upfront about that. I feel, if that's your strategy.
That's right. I think this issue of transhipping and rerouting and how much and how much it impacts the ability for us to sort of impose things like sanctions, or even for companies to compete more. And like, there's a company, Stanley Black and Decker, right? And
Yeah.
it's one of the major
I
U.S.
love that company.
manufacturers.
Yeah.
It competes with Milwaukee Tool. Now, no one takes into account that Milwaukee Tool is a Chinese-owned company, using the Milwaukee brand.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a Chinese-owned company, and just
Stanley Black and Decker, just to be sure, is not right, or
oh
because
no, Stanley
great.
Black and Decker.
I love Stanley Black. I've got a lot of Stanley Black and Decker tools. I'm a
Well,
huge
keep
fan.
buying
Yeah. Okay.
SPD, keep
Okay.
buying
Cool.
DeWalt.
All right. Good. Okay. Good. I don't want you to burst my bubble all of a sudden.
No, no,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
Good.
But
Yeah.
Milwaukee, they were doing all of their manufacturing in China, sending it over to the United States.
Ooh, that's very. It's very very sneaky.
Yeah, yeah, and their drills are inordinately cheap, right? And then as soon as the United States starts tacking on tariffs that could impact those products in China, what do? They move them to Vietnam,
Yeah.
and literally in 3 years, Oren, like a light bulb switched on. They're not using any Chinese components. All of it's being
Yeah.
made in Vietnam.
Yeah.
You think to yourself, huh, is that real? Right? What's really happening there? Do you think that they haven't verticalized all those supply chains from China back into Vietnam? Come on now, right? Like, so what it does is this kind of opacity, it leaves companies at an economic disadvantage, because China's able to wield this extraterritorial power and put these sort of veneer centers all over the world, making it so that the components and the parts, those are still coming from cheap supply chain lines, and then they're assembling it maybe even at a veneer level somewhere else.
Yep. Yep. And the Chinese state is they're actually like helping companies, like their intelligence services and stuff like that, help their companies like that. That doesn't happen in the US. It may happen in some countries like France or something, but it doesn't happen in the US. So they have a lot, and they're those intelligence servers might be involved with bribery, or they might be involved other types of things to help their companies along.
That's right. I mean, there are literal laws, there are blocking statutes, Oren, where it gives the companies in China not only the right, but the specific charge to obfuscate from the United States anything that could lead to any United States enforcement of their laws.
Yep. 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 Which is not surprising. I mean, this is very smart. These are very smart people, very smart adversary. Now, we have a lot of people listening to this are data folks. Like, what are the big data sourcing challenges around all the supply chain data?
Yeah, so the first thing is, the accuracy of the supply chain relationships, right? So at first, most of what people were doing, like, let's go back 5-10 years, most of what people were doing to try to understand supply chains was doing analysis on things like commerce records, right? Like import export records, stuff like that.
Shipping things, those types of things. What's in the container?
That's right. Now, there are some countries that have exposed that stuff globally. Obviously, China in 2018 decided to shut down their import-export data sharing, with the rest of the globe. The EU has never been big on publishing their data.
And why not?
Import exports. What'd you say?
Why isn't the EU?
I think there are considerations of privacy, considerations of data, ownership, right? Like they're much more exclusionary than they are inclusionary, right? So they want things to have to be rebut from being
Okay.
publicly available, right?
Yeah, so kind of like anti-free speech in a way, like okay, you can erase your name from the internet type of stuff.
Yeah, not a lot of visibility to what they believe to be potentially owned information. So I think that the European ports have not gone to open digital platforms because of that, but also most of the ports still have a huge dependence on written records.
Yeah, I've seen some of these records, and it's like in handwriting you can't even understand, and
Exactly.
maybe it's like specifically done that way on purpose. Like I don't even like. It's just I've seen like PDFs of these things, and like it's
It's
like you
crazy.
can't even like
Yes.
OCR it. Like no AI would be smart enough to decipher this terrible handwriting. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, the the jump or the leap from saying, okay, we're going to use things that are shipping records that have limited visibility into more nuanced, more granular, more product specific supply chain data has been a hard jump, but it's been a fantastic one because what the other big data challenge that we try to solve is how do we get from unstructured content, how do we get from non-traditional sources, supplier reliance, and then how do we triangulate where that supplier is actually manufacturing that information. So I'm going to let you in on a little secret that we use product manuals for a part of this.
Ah,
So we get like replacement manuals for products, and in replacement manuals it tells you where suppliers can be found to actually order replacement parts and
got
where
it. So if this specific bolt breaks, you can call this guy in, wherever Vietnam to
and
get that for you.
and they yeah, and this is the MPN to it, and
Yeah.
this is the manufacturing process, and blah blah blah. There's a lot of data in unstructured sources like that.
Got it.
And then what we do is we reverse engineer those unstructured sources into the locations where we know that those suppliers are manufacturing. Very often they have specific certifications or specific business units that are aligned with the type of manufacturing that one part is made of. And so what we can do is we can say, oh, this part is a hexagonal self-locking nut that's made out of their nuts and bolts business that is based in, this part of Vietnam.
Yep.
And then that part of Vietnam is the place or the facility that we're going to start monitoring to understand whether or not you're going to be able to continue to get that bolt when the next tsunami hits, for instance,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So we've been using unstructured mining that we then
Now the problem, of course, is I
validate.
assume a lot of those like a lot of the data that you might get out of a manual may be wrong or like it hasn't been updated in a while or something like that. So even though when you get this big manual from your drill or something, there I imagine like they're not so good about like updating it themselves, right? And
That's
things
right.
like
You do have data latency issues, but if you triangulate between the three major sources, so we have data that is commercial in nature, so import export records, customs brokers, third party resellers. Like there are some great resellers that publish a lot of their catalog and then where that catalog is coming from, right? So we use a lot of that sort of reseller data. So we take, commercially available information, we take the unstructured data, and then finally we also take proprietary data sets. So one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is we've made 5 acquisitions,
yep.
and 4 of those we made because they process proprietary data for some of the largest government agencies or some of the largest corporations in the world. And as a part of processing that data, they've been able to capture data that is their own. So, like for instance, we have
Like a
every
summary of it or some other type of like stats on that data or something like that. Yeah.
exactly it's stats on the data, the supplier purchase, the price, the inventory levels, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that those three things allow us to then have a model, and we have our own model that we use and that we've built to say this is the part that is part of this stent. So like for instance, our AI can say, okay, in the stent, you have a nitinol sheath, you have a polymer layer that's used for insertion. Okay. So then it'll say in that stent, you then need the polymer. Well, the polymer is made of a natural rubber. Where do you get that natural rubber from? Right. And then the second part is it'll say, okay, so then you have nitinol. Where do you get that nitinol from? Who forms the alloy. And then what you can say is, okay, where is the nickel and titanium sourced from for nitinol? And so what we can do is we can say, okay, the Exiger model says this. We can run it then, let's say, in our GPT model, and then we can run that in our Mistral model against our data and have them confirm whether or not we find the same thing across each of those different AI tools. And then we can validate a final derivative answer. Okay. And so that gets us to the most recent information across those three major data types. And then what we do is we continuously monitor that. So we feed data about these parts and products on a continuous basis into our system. And that allows us to identify when one of those signals might change and force us to adapt the graph data set that we've created.
Now, when you're buying these companies, I assume because you're a strategic buyer, you could pay a lot more than a financially oriented buyer, like a PE firm or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. We not only are able to make that promise, but the more important promise that we make to them, Oren, is that we will actually deliver to them a better return on investment for any equity they roll, in addition to the price we pay.
I got it. So for the people who are who are already, they might want to roll some of their some of their stock into the bigger company.
That's right. So like when we bought Supply Dynamics in August of 22, those employees, those teams rolled money into Exiger, and I said, hey, I'm going to make it so that the equity that you roll in will deliver, let's say you roll 30% or 20% or 10%. It'll deliver more in total valuation than your first payout did.
Yeah. Got
Right?
it.
And I can show them the math on the equity to get there. And
obviously, if you're compounding at 20+% and they're only going to be able to get 10% in the stock market or something or less,
that's right. That's right. Our CAGR over the last 5 years has been just under 80%. So when you're talking about growth, we're a very
now so obviously, like, you can pay more, so that's great, but these companies still just like trade whenever they trade. Like, they're not like, are you going in there to try to make the deal happen, or are you just like waiting? Okay, like you've got this list of companies, and then you're waiting for them to like get a process going, and then doing it.
Well, we are proactively, continuously surveying the market. Right now we're in an integration phase, right? So we're investing 32% of our overall revenue back into R&D. We're investing a huge amount of CapEx back into integration and R&D. So we're in an integration and R&D phase. But then as soon as we're out of that, we have a list of 20, 30, 50 companies in a priority order that we want to go out and capitalize on, depending on where the market is and depending on where our own R&D has been able to, open up and unlock opportunities.
So let's say, like, the number, you've got these 50 companies on a list from 1 to 50, and the number 8, and you're not ready to acquire something today, but like the number 8 one's like running a process tomorrow. Like, you're in that process, I presume, anyway.
We're in that process. Yeah. We're learning about the company. We're seeing if the juice is worth the squeeze, right? And all of these companies, we don't buy anything for market share, right? Like, we're not yet at that size and scale where we're just looking to create a conglomerate, right? What we're looking for is enhancement of capability.
Right, so, product.
Exactly. Yep. Product enhancement, product build out. We want to build everything back into the main platform, and we want those capabilities to benefit our existing customers. Like, this is true upsell, cross-sell kind of stuff, right? And so we're looking at the depth and quality of the technology, and we're looking at the depth and quality of the proprietary data that those companies create. We think that there's something special about what they've done. And so we're in that process because we don't want to lose visibility to something that could potentially augment our capability to dominate the market. And you'll see the result of that. I think the Gartner Magic Quadrant is being published this week, or maybe next week at the latest. And so for the supply chain risk management market, you'll see the benefit of that when they publish soon.
But do you or your customers put any stock in anything with the word Gartner on it, or it's
Our
just like coming
customers,
from the tech world, it's like anything Gartner says, almost like usually you just should do the opposite, and that's usually the better strategy. Or Forrester, like they're usually wrong, but like I don't know, how do you? Is it still good marketing because your customers are these huge behemoths and they still care about what some
so
random entity like Gartner? So I mean, I'm showing my own bias here. Like Gartner just seems like the worst, thing out there.
so analysts in general, I think people take a healthy degree of skepticism, but Gartner in particular, because they've picked winners, and I'm not going to mention the others, but some others have
Yeah,
said things like, "Oh yeah, right, Apple, you're going to get into the cell phone market," right? Like some analysts have just been so wrong, had
yeah,
so many whiffs. But Gartner bet on CrowdStrike, right?
yep,
And CrowdStrike then dominated,
yeah,
right?
yep, yeah. Okay,
Gartner
that's
bet on
fair.
ServiceNow, and then
Yeah,
ServiceNow became something that we couldn't even believe. I mean, think about the CRM play that they've built.
yeah,
It's
yeah. It's incredible.
unbelievable,
Both of those are incredible
right?
companies.
And so Gartner, from our customers' perspective, seems to still hold that cachet of like a kingmaker is
Yeah,
picking the right horses. And so, I think it's beneficial to us. But what they do that I think is pretty special or unique is they do take into account the customer, testimonials and the customer feedback that they're getting and all of the customer day to day engagement that they have, at Gartner. And so it is very ground up from the
yeah.
market, which I think, gives it a little bit of credibility. But I know that analysts in general are universally hated. But yeah,
Just whenever I talk to them, I just don't find them that bright.
yeah.
But that's just me.
But the just getting back to your question on data challenges, because I want to make sure I'm saying something to the data community here. One, the best way for us to validate and to create the best data for supply chains is to have a multi-model, both SLM and LLM structure, and then to consume as much data as possible. Or and like because of our scale, because we did that recap with Scott with JMI, Insight, and Carlyle in 2023, we've been able to thrust forward our data purchasing, our data scaling, our data consumption, and just having access to that now and letting the LLMs and the SLMs make sense of it and give us heavily cited supply chain relationships, it has been transformative. Been
Because
transformative.
data is usually about four nouns. It's like people, places, organizations, and products. And you're at least, I don't know how much you have on people, but you're at least you have tons of stuff on the other three nouns, right?
Yes.
And then you've got to do all the joins
Yes.
that happen because, like, of all these products that are like somewhat similar that have to be categorized. And it's like, you can imagine, if you just think of like a 2-liter Coke bottle and then a little Coke bottle and then Diet Coke, they're all like related to one another, right? And I imagine in your case, it's even like more difficult to go. They don't have like an ISBN number usually and some other type of thing. So it's like, how do you think about like all this entity resolution?
But so the first thing I would say is beware the company that says that they are going to implement a standard graph database for you in your supply chain visibility solution.
Yeah.
Because the fact is that your products are unique. Your products are unique. Even if even if everyone is sourcing to, Jabil because they're, a standard scaled top tier OEM,
Yeah.
right? Your supply chains are unique. And so when I bring in, let's say all of the supply chain data related to your vendor, Jabil, your supply chain for your component, right? Like let's say you're a motor scooter manufacturing company, right? And Jabil's doing your manufacturing, their manufacturing processes, their manufacturing suppliers, their manufacturing capacity for that supply chain is completely different than what they're doing for Google or Azure
Yep.
or
Yep.
AWS, right?
Yep.
And it's going to be subject to different constraints, different limitations, different supplier base, even if they're using the exact same hexagonal nut with cadmium plating and
Yeah, yeah,
passivated
yeah.
finishes, right? Like it's going to be different. And so when people say, oh, yeah, like we're plug and play supply chain visibility, it is BS. The only way for you to truly map your supply chains is to take into account the product lines that you are purchasing, or the product lines that you're purchasing for, then the parts that are associated with those individual product lines, and the unique technical specifications that are associated with those parts, and then to map the supply chain from there. Right now, you might use the same data set, you might use the same data and information, but your graph set is going to be uniquely different from those other companies that are in the universe. And if you have somebody plug in their entire graph database, get ready for the hailstorm, the typhoon of false positives that you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
supply chain.
Yeah, that's I mean the problem with like any entity resolution is just like is you have both the false positives and most of the entity resolution systems I've seen is just astronomical. And then
Yes.
of course, and then you're always gonna have tons of false negatives too, which maybe
Yeah.
is better than having a false positive, but still can be a huge problem
Oh, it
as
can be
well.
tough. But that's where what we've done is we've sort of been moving away from on the entity level and the product level and then the part level, moving away from sort of semantic relationship analysis into what I call entity identity. So on both sides of the coin, we force enrichment, right? So let's say I'm looking for, JIT Industries in Alabama, right? So I search them. I might also get JIT Industries in South Carolina that comes back because they have the same name, same information, right?
Yeah.
I have that disjunct. The fact is that one company makes something very similar to the other companies. So you even have this like disjunct in terms of industrial classification. You
Yeah.
can't just use a NAICS code to separate them. What you actually have to do is you have to build the underlying profile. So who are the KMPs? Who are the, what are the cage codes that they use? What are the facilities that they have? Where does their funding come from? And you actually have to build that in advance of trying to do the match. And then that match becomes much richer in terms of false positive and false negative improvement. And so what we're doing right now is we're looking to actually move from semantic relationship and traditional entity resolution clustering, which is just saying like, here's where I've got enough information where I know
Yeah.
is uniquely connected to this entity, where when I get a new address in, I can actually connect it to the entity and have good, good confidence in that. It's actually forcing both sides of that transaction to build out a full generative profile on the fly, and then making the match, which actually, it makes the matching take a little bit longer. But when you think about all of the things you build off of the match, Oren, like, so, I'm going to build your risk profile off of what you match against.
Yeah.
Well, then if I've got that first match wrong, well, then I'm going to build a risk profile that's going to, sort of compound this issue of a false positive. Now I got false positive risks. Now I've got false positive
Exactly. Yeah.
disruption. You know what I mean? Like it's an exponential equation. So we're just investing a lot more in the entity identity analysis as opposed to just traditional semantic analysis.
Cool. You guys are in the DC area, right? What are some of the advantages of building a company in the DC area?
Yeah. So obviously, we have really, really close proximity and really tight integration with the regulators. So
Yeah.
that's a huge benefit to us, right? Like we talk with the people on the Hill, we talk with the people in the new administration.
Right. And
But really,
people at your company, their kids go to school with those people. And so they'll see them at the soccer game too.
yeah,
It's, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. And so, like, we think about government affairs, we think about integration and writing policy and writing law as core parts of our go to market motion. I don't think most people or most companies, until maybe the last couple of years, really thought about how to invest in policy making, in regulatory rulemaking as a part of creating the market that they're in and defining the market so that they can meet those business needs, right? And so being in DC, we're just so drenched in it, we can't get away from it, even if we wanted to. And so that's a real advantage. The second thing about being based in DC is that there are lots of really nice hubs around DC where you can get great talent. So, like, we have an office in Tyson's, right? And so we get a lot of the pull from the defense, technology companies that are out there, like SAIC and all the other great companies that are in the Beltway. But then also, we're a hop, skip, and a jump away from Richmond, and we can pull from all of the UVA talent, all of the Virginia Tech talent, all of the VCU talent. Like, we've got these great hubs that are so close to Washington, where it's a 45-minute or an hour and a half drive away, and we're in a completely different cost of living. We're in a completely different labor market. We're in a completely different group of people that we can pull talent from. So, DC's just got this great central point to it. In addition to be obviously this like center for policymaking and for world volatility right now.
Now, back in the day, like, the only CEO with a beard was Larry Ellison. Now it's like super common to see CEOs with a beard. Like, is that like, how do you like, is like, how do you think about that? Obviously, for people who are listening, they might not realize you have a beard, but like, I would say like a very high percentage of people I'm interviewing nowadays like have a beard, was like that never happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look back at my old pictures, I've always had the beard. So this
So
isn't a
you were an
copy.
OG. You did
I'm an
it like,
OG
okay,
beard guy. Yeah,
pre-gray
yeah.
hair. Yeah.
It's now almost completely gray, but it is still, the beard is intact. So I think that people used to think that beards, that they reflected either something that was much older, much more
Yeah,
professorial,
yeah,
or
professorial.
people felt like a beard was uncouth. Like it
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
it was one or the other.
Right. Obviously,
And
now we have like a vice president with a beard. Like these are just new things that we just didn't
that's
have
right.
before.
That's
Yeah.
right. And so the way that I feel about the beard is it's it's if you can keep it intact, if you can make sure that it doesn't go
Too
overgrown,
crazy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it actually shows a level of discipline.
Yeah, totally. Good point.
You
Yeah.
really got to invest to keep. I mean, I can shave this beard off and shave tomorrow and shave tomorrow, and it's a quick touch up, right? It's
Yeah.
no problem. But keeping this thing so that it actually looks presentable takes real commitment. Shows that
Okay.
discipline guy.
Yeah. It's like gardening. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Two more questions we ask all of our guests. What's a conspiracy theory that you believe?
So I don't have a lot of conspiracy theories that I believe, because I'm actually one of these people that believes that the world is just not that organized. Like, I've gotten the chance to meet a lot of, our global leaders. Like I said, I spend a lot of time in Congress. I probably have 200 uh, congressional members and senator meetings a year. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm I'm meeting the world leaders. We were a part of the COVID-19 response. I got to meet, like, so many CEOs of major pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies and stuff like that. I was a part of the monitorship for HSBC. I was leading the compliance overhaul for multiple banks after the financial crisis. When I meet people that are in the positions of power and control, they're just like us. They're trying to get through the next challenge, the next hurdle, the next blocking and tackling motion. So I'm not a big conspiracy theorist.
But we
I will
literally
tell
just
you,
went over like 6 of them, like all these different, like, pricing conspiracies and evading sanctions. And
yeah,
so, yeah,
and that's just habitual greed and
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
right? But I do have one where I have a anti-conspiracy.
Okay, great.
So I don't believe that intelligent or, like, super intelligent life like a human exists on any other planet.
On any planet,
On
period.
any other planet
Okay.
besides Earth.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because most of us think about the sort of circumstellar habitable zone, But there's this guy, Dr. Hugh Ross, and I'm a big physics buff. I invented a theory called the probabilistic constrained collapse theorem, and like I will probably publish it one day. I've tested it through
Okay, cool.
every model. It's a model that basically marries classical mechanics and quantum mechanics and can help to do things like predict qubit positioning in quantum computing. But basically, I'm a big theoretical physics buff. And there's this guy, Dr. Hugh Ross, who was a Caltech professor that wanted to prove the existence of God. But one of the things that he did was he looked at what are called the habitable zones. And there are actually 11 habitable zones. And I've done the research behind what Dr. Hugh Ross had done. And there's the circumstellar habitable zone, there's the ultraviolet habitable zone, there's the tidal habitable zone, there's the obliquity, the eccentricity, but there are all these habitable zones. There's 11 of them. And the probability that all of these would exist at once is so near zero. And the universe would actually have to be as
Oh,
big.
you have to have them all happening to have intelligent life?
That's right. All happening. And the universe would have to be as big and as old as it is to have all of these probabilities coexist. So I feel like,
And you don't think it's ever happened in the history of the universe, or you think it's not currently existing right this second?
I don't think it currently exists right this second.
Okay.
I'd have to do a lot more math and a lot more thinking to think about, did it ever exist?
All right.
But so I don't believe in the alien conspiracy theories. And I think that there's good evidence that it doesn't exist at all. And so that leads to a bigger conspiracy, which is, what the hell are all those UFOs?
All right, but last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Do what you love. It's again BS. Andre Agassi never loved playing tennis. Incredible tennis player.
Yeah.
Right? Incredible tennis player. Loved competition, knew he was good at it. A lot of people that are doing the greatest things in the world today didn't start out thinking that that's what they wanted to do, didn't get joy out of those things. They realized that they had the intellectual capacity to understand them, the unique capability to execute against them, and the will to bear the objections and the rejection that comes with trying to do something new. And so for me, I didn't imagine myself being in supply chains. I wasn't originally in love with data analytics and artificial intelligence. I became a programmer because I had to. I became a risk management expert because I had to. I realized the market opportunity in supply chains, and we built this business because we knew it was necessary. But
you love it now.
I love it now.
Right. So Andre Agassi never loved tennis ever. Like he never ended up loving it. Right?
It's don't be over precious about what drives your passion, because what you're good at and what you love at any one point in time can be in conflict, and that's okay. But it's the grit, the determination, and the willingness to push through that, to wake up every day and keep working until you've, achieved your goal, that eventually becomes the thing you love.
So I've asked this question out to maybe 200 people, and I'd say 50% of them, a very high percentage, 40, 50%, say have the exact same answer as you. It is just it is now almost. I feel like we've now must be the conventional wisdom not to do what you love, because everyone now believes this thing, and now which makes me more skeptical. Maybe I'm maybe we should do what I don't know. I don't even know how I think about it anymore. Yeah.
The thing is, though, I mean, if you think about the Japanese principle on work, and there are a lot of people that that even in my own business say to me, oh, this isn't my core skill set, or this isn't what I'm good at, or this isn't where I find this isn't where I find joy, and this
fulfillment.
Isn't fulfillment. Yeah. And it's I still think it is very it is very it is very common for people to think like I'm going to do what what I'm fulfilled by,
Yeah.
right? It's sort of ikigai, Japanese principle, and that, Kaizen sort of incremental growth principle where you have harmony between, what you love doing and what you love working on. Work is hard,
Yeah.
Oren.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, and I'm glad that 50% of the people said what I said,
Yeah.
because I think all of us need to realize that that's the
Well,
reality.
and there's a certain generation where they almost have this expectation, like, oh, I have to get this like massive fulfillment out of like the work stuff, where like maybe that just grows over time. And if you're 23, like you're probably not going to get that
That's
much
right.
fulfillment that comes out of it. One question for you, say, like I do, or tell me if you disagree or agree here, but working with people you don't respect, you don't enjoy, like that seems really tough. And so like, is that a prerequisite? Like, should you choose? I mean, obviously for some people, they don't have a choice. They have to do what they have to do. But if you have a choice, should you be choosing to work with people that you respect, that you enjoy working with, et cetera?
I think you have to be willing to work with the people that fate puts in front of you and learn from it. The
Okay.
people that I have learned the most from, except with one exception, I mean, I've had some bosses where they taught me incredible lessons that I took with me, right? Um, Incredible lessons in the way that they operated, incredible lessons in the way that they thought about, business. Uh, and I will take those with me. But I've learned just as much, if not more, from the people that I thought couldn't offer me a lick of advice.
Interesting.
And I learned how not to do things. I
Yeah.
learned how
Sometimes
to
that's the
how to
best thing to
deal with
learn.
them.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so many people like by working with people that have those tough personalities, I've learned so many people just want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have learned that if I didn't work with people that, I didn't enjoy, right? Um, and so, I think life's too short to stay with those people for very long,
Yeah,
Orange.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want to be married to those people,
That's
but
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's right. But having them in your career, it's like when you lose deals and you do the postmortem and you learn
yeah.
and you get better. It's like Nelson Mandela said, like I never lose, I win or I learn.
Yep.
That's the same principle goes for people.
Oh, I love it. All right, thank you, Brandon Daniels, for joining us at World of DAS. I follow you on LinkedIn. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage you there. This has been really interesting and a ton of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oren. It's been awesome.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to World of DAS wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and more. And please help us get discovered by leaving a review. And check out worldofdas.com. That's worldofdas.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter @Auren. That's AUREN. Would absolutely love to hear from you.